So our last ones were the most difficult. This is the easiest one. Reflections across x and y is just going to change our x values from positive to negative or y values from positive to negative. So let's take a look. If I'm reflecting across the x-axis, essentially what's happening is A is going to end up being negative. Now, if it's -1, then I'm going to do the reflection. If it's not -1, then I'm going to actually take care of the reflection when I multiplied those y values by -1. Otherwise, I'm just going to take the y coordinate and multiply it by -1. So just as we talked about before, we take A times the y values. So that's exactly what a reflection across the x-axis would do. It would just be a reflection using -1 or say -7 or something like that. Across the x-axis, we're essentially just going to, across to the y-axis changes the x-coordinate, changes the sign of the x-coordinate. So again, if you've already done all of your other transformations, then we take it and flip it. So let's take a look. Here we have a graph, so I didn't give you the ordered pairs, which you can certainly do. I want to reflect it across the x and reflect it across the y. So I'm going to choose this one here and this one here. Oops, this one here. So for my purple one, it's y equals negative f of x, which means I'm taking the y value and I'm changing it to negative, which means the x value is going to stay the same. So I'm going to take this point here and change the y value to negative, so that's going to pop across the x-axis. This point at 2 becomes a point at -2. This point at 4 becomes a point at -4. Oops, I think this guy should have been at -3. I got a little overzealous. And this guy at -1 becomes +1. So my new function looks like this. Whereas my other function, I'm using a negative x, which means my x value is just going to change signs. So this -2, 3 becomes +2, 3. My 0, 2 remains exactly the same. My 1, 4 becomes -1, 4, because I'm just popping it over to the other side of the x-axis. My 4, 1, my 4, -1 becomes -4, -1. So my new function should look like that, which is reflected across the x-axis. So here's one for you to try. One of them is transformation across x, one's across y. Make sure you know which is which. Try this, pause it, try this question, then press play to see how you did. So again, I'm going to do two different functions. I'm going to use one in green, I'll do one in blue. So the question is, which one is which? If I'm looking at my first function, it says negative f of x, which basically means a negative y. So I'm going to change my y values, which means it's actually going to reflect across the x. But if I change my y, this 2 becomes -2, this 1 becomes -1, this 5 becomes -5, and this 0 still is 0. So my new green function, which reflected across the x-axis, which is why I changed the y values, this is my x-axis, is the green function. The second function is telling me to change x, which means this 1, 2 becomes -1, 2, and notice it's going to reflect it across the y. This 2, 1 becomes -2, 1. 3, 5 becomes -3, 5 because I'm changing x, and then 5, 0 becomes -5, 0. So my new function looks like that, which is my original function flipped across the x-axis. Sorry, the y-axis.